everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Higher Caliber. Today is a special day. We're doing a Father's Day episode here. Me and Jerrod are sitting here with Whiskey Mike Center and Jason Simmering.
All right, so Jason's our newest guest. We've heard from everybody else. So, Jason, you mind giving yourself a brief intro here?
Yeah, my name is Jason Simmering. Grew up with the rest of these clowns in a small town.
Yep.
Old Whiskey Mike's had a little bit of influence on my life over a couple of years.
He was like the Godfather.
He definitely was. Everybody should have that one extra dad in their life that sometimes gives them wisdom that is, you have to know when to use it and when not to use it.
Even when you don't want to hear it.
Yeah, definitely when you don't want to hear it. So I spent some time with some of these guys on a volunteer fire department. Tim and I were probably best friends for quite a few years. Spent some time playing paintball together, worked together for a couple of years. So it's just been in and out of life stuff together. Just been a fan of the show and had the idea for the Father's Day episode and wanted to record some special stuff because I feel like we've all been in the same circle, spent time with a lot of the same people. So had a lot of good experiences.
Right, for sure, man.
For sure.
So I think today we don't really want to tell anybody how to be like a good dad, but kind of give some stories of how dads in our lives have shaped us, right? And just some advice.
Yeah, we're not going to tell you how to be a good dad like we told you how to be a good dude.
Yeah, I don't want to do that because...
But also, if you do get some affirmation from this podcast, you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean... I'll be honest. I was personally conflicted on a couple of those good dude moments. I was driving for work and I was like, man, he's calling me out right now.
No, I wasn't calling anybody specifically out. It was just, you know.
Well, I re-listened to the episode and I think I have a problem with fat people because I used the word overweight like 3 times. And I'm like, I don't really hate fat people.
Overweight's pretty PC, I think, nowadays, though.
Yeah. But I went back to listen to it. And I'm like, it just sounds like I don't like fat people. So
I think most people could be labeled as that unless you're in love with Lizzo. You know,
That's
unless
true.
you worship Lizzo, then you hate fat people.
That's true.
I think.
Yeah.
She looks just like Lizzo. She's so beautiful.
Yeah, just don't say obese. People, I think, take offense to that.
Yeah.
Or rotund.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like if your
Cuts deep.
if your Silverado is slightly smaller than you, that's not a good thing, right? You know?
Says the guy driving a Kia.
Well, to give some people some context. Yeah, right. Dad, you have 3 kids.
I have 3 kids, 4 grandkids.
Yep. Tim, how old are your boys?
My boys are 8 and almost 6. He's 5. He's 6 next month.
Already.
Yeah. It's crazy how time flies.
Jason?
So I've got 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. Oldest is 15. She's going to get the driver's permit next month. Middle one will be 13 in August. And then I've got a 9-year-old. So.
Are you teaching her how to drive?
I will be forced to teach her how to drive. I think that's kind of how that goes. Especially seeing how the oldest is a girl, like her and her mom, they really butt heads. They're so much alike. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
So she was like, I'll just smack her if I have to get the car with her.
How much is it to install that passenger brake pedal? Have you looked into that?
I haven't. I tell you what, I've been putting this off so hard that I've like tried to even not look up stuff about it.
You might get lucky. I mean, when we taught Tim to drive, Tim was pretty cool. Jerrod, when Jerrod learned to drive, I didn't have a job where I made enough money to buy enough alcohol or street drugs to calm me before I put him behind the wheel.
I think he was there the first time I drove the car, and then it was Mom the rest of the way out.
That's really surprising, actually, the way that she acts.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
We had better life insurance on her.
Was that it? Yeah. I think we drove down like Lucas North and Kerr, and Dad's like, Yeah.
Well, I mean, if there's a side note for your dad and driving, I remember he was teaching me how to drive engine at the firehouse. And we're going up Lucas North, and there's this car coming down the road, and he just looks at me from the captain's seat. He goes, just remember, nobody wants to hit this truck. You own the road. He goes, you don't have to be in the ditch. Nobody's going to run into this thing head on. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, you're bigger.
Yeah.
Jerrod, what about you? What's your demographics look like for your kids?
Oh yeah, I forgot. My youngest is going to be 3 and my oldest is 4.
Wow. Both
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah.
How's that? I have 2 boys. You have 2 girls.
Well, I don't know what it's like to have boys, so I guess it's okay.
Let me be honest with you. I mean, Tim, I don't know what your experience is, but with the boys, and I'm sure, Mike, you can chime in on this. You will find times raising a boy that you just want to beat the you out of your son.
Mm.
And that's the biggest challenge is you're recognizing, well, that's the me. Like, I'm
I
100%
don't know.
looking in the mirror.
I see a lot of Jerrod and his oldest daughter.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, you're in trouble.
Just,
She's kind of a butthole.
yeah.
Just to be nice about it. My lip's still busted from a punch in the teeth.
I just
yesterday.
go, he deserves this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of thought I dodged a bullet by not having a little me running around, but I guess I didn't.
Yep. So I guess we'll go around here.
Okay.
And I've written down just characteristics. And I know we said we're not going to tell you
Yeah.
How to
Not
be-
definitively.
how to be a good dad, but in your opinion or your mind, what are characteristics of a good dad? Go to Whiskey Mike on this one.
Sure. Well, when I grew up, I always felt like my dad wasn't there. Right. I felt a lot of times my dad wasn't there for one reason or another. So I think 2 of the most important characteristics of a good dad is someone who spends time or makes time for their kids. And 2, one that actually listens, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't really start listening to kids until I had grandkids.
Thanks, Dad.
Well, but it's true. When you're a dad, you got little kids and you're trying to work and you're trying to provide for them and you got all this other crap going on. Because you have to think about it this way. Not only are the kids new people in your life, but so's the woman, right?
Mm.
I mean, you've got so much new stuff going on in your life that you're just trying to get by every day. And it's when I had grandkids that I really had the time to sit and listen to what they were telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, damn, I wish I'd listened to my kids like that, you know, because
Me too.
they tell me so much stuff, you know. I mean, Tim, you could have grown up to be a multimillionaire if I'd listened to you, but, you know,
Oh, man.
but, you know,
Son of a son.
no, but really, those are the 2 things that I think are really important.
Just listening and
Listening and being.
Mhm.
Yep. Jason, what about you?
So I think one of the bigger things for me is you have to be vulnerable to your kids
Okay.
in 2 ways. I think it's hard to do. You have to be the real human. Like, let them see you experience life. Let them see you. Like, if you're struggling with something,
Right.
you don't have to be that ultra tough guy, the macho, you know,
Right.
my dad's
Mhm.
the super strong guy. Like, otherwise some kids are going to grow up not knowing how to deal with a situation.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And in different parts of life, like, we've all seen different things that are, you know, sometimes it comes back and it's, you know, it'll mess with you a little bit. But just be vulnerable. And I think one of the biggest ones that's super hard for me personally is owning up to mistakes to your kids.
Okay.
Let them know that, like, yeah, it's okay to be human. Like, you're going to fail. You're going to screw something up.
Definitely.
But if you own it, it's better. And it teaches them how to deal with failure and mistake in their life. We'll get back to it later, but just them seeing me experience the loss
Mhm.
of my dad,
Yeah.
just watching me go through that whole walk, or just other things, whether it's job related stress,
Yeah.
dealing with situations, just let them see you go through normal day life. Like, you don't have to hide that away from the kids. And I think that comes back to what you said, Mike, about just being around. The more you're around, the more they're going to see you. And, just remember, I think that's the other part is you have to remember that your kids, whether you think they are or not, they're watching.
So they're definitely always watching.
Yes, they're going to do what you're doing. So yeah.
Jerrod?
I don't want to steal anybody's stuff, but I was gonna.
It's hard to go last.
Yeah, I was pretty much gonna say the same thing. Just being present. I think the important part is you don't always have to be there with them, but when you're actually there, you're tuned in and paying attention. And I'm the biggest offender of that myself.
It's hard. It really is, because when you're home, you're trying to get that downtime, that relaxed time.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I'll listen to freaking a podcast talking about fatherhood while my kids are talking. And I'm like, all right, go do something else.
I'm busy.
And I catch myself doing that all the time. I'm like, yeah, that's being a good dad. And then like my actual kids are right there in front of me. And I'm like, crap.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I get that. It's sometimes hard to get any, like you were talking about, kind of resting or relaxing or anything, because, you're at work working, and then you come home. Well, you still have a job to do, and that's, to be a dad. So, you definitely have to take the time to, relate with your kids and spend time with your kids. And like you said, Jason, they're always watching. So, they are very, perceptible to, picking up things that they see or whatever. Like, I think being a good person in general all the time in front of your kids is going to set them up for success, kind of like always doing the right thing, so that's what I think.
I see people, I mean, I've had so many different vocations, occupations in my life that I've done that the one thing that always shocks me is that I see people that are very high earners. I mean, they make tons of money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got to work 10 years to make what they work in a year. And I watch I listen how they talk about their children and their family. And these people are so not in tune with their children that a couple times a year, they prepare. And I mean, they prepare all year for 3, 4, 5 days so they can spend that with their children, right? And they go somewhere and they spend a lot of money. And you say, if I spend a lot of money on vacation, I spend $1,000, $2,000. These people are spending tens of thousands of dollars to do what they're doing. And just to get those few days. And I think about it, and being a father is something that happens every day.
Right.
Yeah. And I feel sorry for those people because they're so busy and so intellectually challenged with everything that's going on around them that they have to actually schedule a couple days a year to be a dad. Right. And that's sad.
Well, what about the parents that are so freaking bougie rich that they have a freaking nanny that raises their kids?
Oh, that would be great. I mean, that sucks.
I mean, seriously, like, I don't get it.
It's funny because I've noticed in certain economic cultures, let's call it that, where people, they're used to a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
The word babysitter does not exist, right? It's do you have a babysitter? Because, you're a fireman, right? And if you needed someone to watch your kids for, 2 times a week, you'd be like, oh, I got a babysitter. That's not in their language. The only language they have is nanny. Right. And that is that person. And it could be once a week. It could be every day, but they don't use the term babysitter. I've never heard it.
Interesting. You run with a lot of rich people?
I do.
Interesting.
I do. Yeah.
So would you all agree that you didn't really grow up until you became a dad for the first time?
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if the first time is what really straightened it out, but I mean, it woke me up.
Right.
I don't know how many times, like, I don't know about you guys, I don't know, Mike, if you told him this, but I know my dad several times would be like, nothing will wake you up like that first kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the whole world changes, and that's an understatement.
I think things started making sense.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Like your role.
Yeah. Or why, maybe not why things went certain ways, but maybe like you kind of got it. Like, for instance, so dad used to, well, he still works in Columbus, but you were gone, like you used to drive back and forth and you were gone all the time, right? I'm not saying that you were never there. And I'm sure you wanted to spend more time with us. But I talked about it on an earlier podcast about being a good dude. You can be a good dude, I think, to one extreme that you're hurting the other. So, you're trying to make ends meet for your family and provide a good life for them, by being an earner and working. But then I think the other part tends to suffer sometimes because you're not there. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that you weren't there, but in my mind now, that is a struggle as a dad.
That's
because
100% true.
I would love to stay home and hang out with the kids, but I also want to provide them a good life.
Right.
So I'm going to pick up all those overtime shifts,
right,
and make sure that they have all those things that they need and the extra things. I don't, I wouldn't say that we're bougie, but we're not eating, ramen every night, but I want them to have a good life. So that's why I do that. But then again, your mental health, it's always a struggle, right? Because you're trying to, make everybody happy.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, I agree with that. And, like I said, I worked at a steel mill for about a little over 7.5 years, I think. And it was the same thing, like a 4-guy rotation in my position, whenever there's overtime, I want to eat that up. I want to basically have that extra money. And in my mind, when I was eating all that overtime, I'm just like, you know what? I'm sitting at work and I'm thinking, I'll get the text message. Hey, they want to go do this. They want a membership to the pool. They want to do something. They want to, he wants this for his birthday or something for Christmas. And I'm like, no problem.
Right.
It's just, that's a couple hours overtime. Let's get it done.
Yeah, get it done.
And it wasn't until we were on a family vacation. At the end of the vacation, my wife says, she asked our youngest what her favorite part was. And her statement was that I didn't go to work the entire time.
Right. That hurts.
And nothing will make you feel like a complete bag of crap, like when your kid calls you out for not being there. Right. And for the next couple hours of the drive, I think I was just contemplating the choice I'd made to that point in life. And I remember talks with my dad about that, where he said, it's, you want to do everything in your power to provide a better life for your kids. But then, like we were saying, you also have to be a part of the better life for your kids.
Right.
So yeah, it's 100% struggle on.
Yeah. It's not just about material things, at least in my opinion, which it sounds like some of the high class people that your Whiskey Mike runs with sometimes, it's about that. It's about being the top dog, and it's about having the whatever the hell they have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked to people that, live in affluent neighborhoods. And when I say affluent, I mean the houses are $1.5 million, $2 million, right? And they work for companies that expect them to entertain and be able to do these other things for people. So 2 houses down, they buy another $2 million house.
Right.
And that house is simply to have guests, right? I mean, that's the kind of money I'm talking about. These people, they have to plan everything in their life.
Right.
And children is something that they plan.
Is that generational for them?
No, it's pretty, honestly, some of it is cultural, how they were raised, where they came from, their backgrounds, and it's how they were treated as children,
So it's what they know.
Yeah. It's honestly what they know, Yeah. I spent some time with dad once a year, and that was it.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
Well, we talked on the first podcast where I interviewed you, and you had said Tim asked you a question or something one day, and you had no idea who he was.
Yeah, so
something like that.
Tim was actually 8 years old, and at the time I was a chief medic, and I was working so much time. I was working 6-7 days a week. I was working 10, 12, 14 hours, sometimes 24 hours a day. And I remember I was sitting in the living room and I was reading a book and Tim walked up and asked me a question. I looked up at him and I'm like, I don't even know this kid. You know, there has to be a change in my life. And I actually went out and got a job where I could be home every night, you know, and people knew when I was coming home because I realized that I hadn't spent the time with him. I didn't know him. I mean, it was almost like being divorced, right? So, I mean, your wife drops the kid off or brings the kid to the station to see you. Right. And that was bad. That was bad. And I realized that, but it took the first 8 years of his life, first 4 years of yours to make that change and actually see it, that it just wasn't about working all the time.
So another thing I think that a lot of people don't talk about when you become a dad is eventually you're going to have to try to coach your children. And I try to use the word coaching because you can't just be the disciplinarian. You can't just be the teacher. You have to coach it both ways. And Mike, it's your credit. I think you did a good job at this in a couple of examples when we were around. And I thought about this a couple of days ago. Do you remember the concrete bunny incident?
No, I do not.
I don't know if you passed the statute of limitations.
The concrete
It's
bunny.
statute, but it's supposed to be a pun. Tim didn't get it.
Oh.
You didn't get it.
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
I just no. We don't have to go into depth on that. But I just remember. I remember. You know, when she found it, we all came into the basement, and you came downstairs, and you had this look on your face like, I know I have to talk to these guys. And I know that she's listening from the top of the stairs.
Yeah.
So with the sternest voice you were like, I cannot believe you guys were dumb enough to do this. And you guys should never do anything like this again. And I just remember looking at your face because there was a little bit of disappointment in the way you were talking to us. But in your face, there was also like, I really want to just take you guys outside and laugh about this because you're like, I know this is something that I would have done as a kid.
Exactly.
And I think it was one of those things where you chalked it up to they're living, they're doing it. They're going out, they're bonding together. They're getting you get into a little bit of trouble, but nobody got hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
And as long as that's the way you approach it, I think at times, like I'll be sitting at the breakfast table and watch my wife and my daughter just get into it because they're basically the same person at different ages.
Amen.
And,
I agree with it too.
And I just want to look at them both. And I think they recognize the facial expression sometimes where I'm like, if you could listen to yourselves, you would just sit here and laugh at you.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think the coaching part where you have to, and I think that's one of the things about being vulnerable with them is if they make a mistake, it's easier to coach them out of that mistake if you have a relatable experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you're willing to admit that experience, you know?
And that's where the role of the mentor comes in, not necessarily somebody that's always going to punish you, but somebody that's going to challenge you and expect better of you, which when you're a teenager, it's the worst thing in the world.
Definitely.
I mean, a lot of people, whether it's your actual parent or just somebody in your life, but like I said, when you're a teenager, it's the worst thing in the world, but a lot of people don't really have that experience. So I actually, I pulled out some stats because I thought they were interesting about fatherless homes.
Drop the numbers on us, Chuck.
Yeah. And this stuff just kind of blew me away. So the U.S. has the highest rate of children living in a single parent household of any nation in the world. 80% of single parent homes are led by single mothers. Even with children with fathers living in the home, the average school age boy spends about 30 minutes per week with one-on-one conversations with his father. 30 minutes. 90% of all homeless and runaway children, 63% of all teen suicides, 85% of all children and teens with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. 70% of teenage pregnancies come from women raised in fatherless homes. This one's crazy. fatherless kids are 20 times more likely to be incarcerated than children in two-parent households, which is insane. But this last stat, I think, is the most telling. It says if a man and a wife raise a child, they are less likely to end up in jail, but they have the same chances as children raised by just their father.
Wow.
So that's insane.
Right. And so for my experience growing up, first of all, like I really did feel like when I was listening to the Good to Be a Good Dude podcast, I was like, man, I think they're talking about my dad.
Yeah.
Like my dad was
Definitely
like what I would call a good dude.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
He was a solid guy. And I'm not going to try and say that he didn't make a mistake here and there. I mean, everybody's human. We all make mistakes. But he was a good dude. And so I had the opposite of the situation of the statistics. I was raised by a single dad since from two. So almost from the beginning, it was just him and I, and we were ultra close, and it was a bond that was unshakable because of that. But I can see that. I mean, it's kind of obvious around the world, and you work with other kids. So one of the bigger things that I've done in my life is I started volunteering in a youth group at the church, local church, and I lead right now the 12th grade boys ministry.
Oh, wow.
And it's very evident. There's a couple, and the guys that need the most attention are the ones that reach out to me more for one-on-one specifics. It's from that home.
Yeah.
They don't have that influence in their life. And I think Whiskey Mike here did a great thing in life. And my dad was a good example of it too, is it's great to be a good dad to your own kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a good thing to pour into the people that are around your kids.
Yeah.
Like your kids' friends. Because there's, let's just be honest, guys, we all grew up through the same, kind of era, and there's things that you don't want to talk about with your dad when you're a teenager.
Right.
But if there's another solid dad figure in your life, then you've got somebody else to turn to.
Right.
And I feel like that can kind of curb statistics, being one of those solid guys that's out there for somebody that maybe doesn't have that figure in their life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I agree with a lot of that.
It's really difficult. And I agree with you. I've done some teaching with children in organized groups. And you're right. The children, when they come from a single parent family, they tend to want the most attention. They have the most questions. They act out more because they want attention from somebody. They want that adult attention, and they don't get it at home. It's sad. It truly is. But fact of life, I guess.
Yeah. And Dad, I asked you this last night, but I'm going to ask you again since we're on the mic. Do you think you became a better father by doing what your father did or doing what your father didn't do?
For me, it was doing what my father didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have enough time with my own father. He taught me all the basics, but I didn't feel I had enough time. And I felt like I needed to spend more time with my kids and doing things that I thought kids should do. I had two boys. So I thought that hunting and fishing and hiking and being at your sporting events. I remember, as a family now, when one of my grandsons are playing baseball, whether it be T-ball or coach pitch or whatever, we go. It's just expected that we go. And as many people go as possible. But I remember when I was 5 and 6 years old, that they would say, you have to leave at 11 this morning for baseball practice. Okay. So I'd have to get my bat, my ball, and tie it to my bike. And I'd have to ride across town at 5 and 6 years old to go to a practice that I didn't get anything out of because no one reinforced or showed me anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was horrible at it and I hated it, but they made me go. So every summer, that's what I had to do. And I can only remember one time that my parents came, while I was growing up. And it was just, you weren't expected, And so it would be like, I wanted to learn to swim. So they said, well, ride to the high school. Here's some money. Sign up in a program. And so the hill to get to the high school was like this major angle that I
rode uphill both ways.
I had to. No, it was so bad that I had to get off. I had to get off, and I'd have to push my bike up the hill. Right?
I've been there.
And so, yeah, we lived on Lucas North.
I know what hill you're talking about.
That's a hill.
I mean, that was the kind of thing that I was really talking about. And so I just told myself that when I had kids, I wouldn't do that, that I would try to go to their practices and I would try to show them things that I wasn't the best at, but at least I'd try.
Right.
Would you recommend that people have kids as early as they can without wrecking themselves financially?
Yeah, I would. And the only fact is that, again, I work with different cultures of people, and I see professional people. It's funny because I see these professional people that are 32, 33 years old, and they come to work and they're giddy. And the reason they're giddy is they had their first date.
Wow.
Right. And so they had their first
nerd.
They had their first real date, and the buildup when they're 34 of being nervous because a guy's going to ask somebody to marry him. Right. And then they got all this debt to pay for. So at 40, they have a child. Now you think about 40 and having a child. They're 60, 61, 62 when the child is getting out of, going into college, doing those kind of things. Right. Their parents really can't enjoy grandchildren. And you guys can call me out because you're the fathers. But I think spending time with my grandchildren, being younger, I'm able to add more to them, right? I'm able to have a better relationship with them. I'm able to take them places and do things and form some memories for them so that they can look back and say, I want to do this for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to perpetuate that. So I think that's important.
I have to agree. So my dad was 19 when he had me. I waited a couple more years. I was 23 when we had ours. But from the same aspect, my dad was very young when my kids, came into the world, and he was able to do, active things and be a fun grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter what time of the day it was or how many hours my dad had worked. If we would go to his house, I want a tractor ride. Okay, let's go. I mean, it could be the middle of the wintertime. He'd throw on a Carhartt coat and take him out to the barn, start up the tractor. Let's go drive around in the snow. Who cares?
Yeah.
My one daughter looked at him and goes, "Man, Grandpa, this would be a great place for a pool."
And then he got a pool.
And my dad was like, "You know what? Let's build a pool." And my mom was like, "What the heck?" She's like, "I have wanted a pool almost the entire time we've been married. You never wanted to build a pool." And he goes, "Well, now my grandkids want a pool. It's different."
You never got a pool as a kid, did you?
I never got a pool as a kid. But then again, when we came to the point where we wanted a pool, I was already like a teenager in that, late teenager where I wasn't spending that much time around the house, going. It was different. But I think I'm seeing other friends in life that are, just for perspective, I'm about to turn 40, and I'm seeing my friends that are, still have kids that are 3 and 4 or just now starting to have kids. And I'm like, dude.
Yeah. It's great that they're having them, but it's definitely a society shift. I think that we're just as a society, telling people that you need to get that bag and you need to go do you. And then finally, when you're bored, you can settle down.
Oriented.
Yeah. When you're bored, you can settle down and have kids. And not saying you should just jump out there and have kids right away. I mean, do it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think as a society, we need to because
don't have kids in high school.
Oh, I had a kid at 19. Well, that wasn't that weird. You were,
yeah,
he was an adult.
He was an adult, and he was, he jumped in, got responsible about it. He became a firefighter in the Air National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
So he provided a home, provided a living, did the right things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that goes back to the maturity thing, because when you get married, sure, you have some more responsibility, but until you have a kid, then there's truly somebody more important than yourself. And that's when you're like, oh crap.
It just got real.
Yeah. I'm just saying that's what it is. You're like, this thing, this being is more important than me.
Right.
And when you get married, you have more responsibility, but the other person isn't truly like they were taking care of themselves before you met.
But I think
You know what I mean?
I think that's a really big part of it. And I think with society today, you know, you see such the high rate of divorce and everything else. I think that's another thing as a good dad that we can strive to is let your kids see you be a good spouse.
Yeah.
Like, and let them see you
I'm glad we didn't skip over that. That's
like,
important.
Let them see you prioritize that relationship. Because let's be honest, like our kids are, you know, one of the greatest and most important things in our life. And Mike, I think you can attest to this, but there's going to be a point in time where those kids are going to they're going to go walk on their own path. And how many times do you hear the story? Well, you know, when the kids moved out of the house, like I had to learn how to be around her all the time.
So I had that point in my marriage, and we've been married about 10 years.
Okay.
And my wife and I were sitting in a room without children for once.
2 Christmases. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I asked her a question. I said, you know, we were married young, and I said, you know, we have nothing in common. And she kind of looked at me and she says, well, what does that mean? I said, well, when these kids grow up, what's going to happen to us? Right. And it really made me think a lot about what I needed to do as a husband and what I needed to do for her. And then I started to notice something over the years. I noticed it with my parents, and then I noticed it with other people. And this is purely my opinion, but I've always seen it. If I see a couple and either one of the spouses can say, my children are the most important things in my life, they failed. They absolutely failed. Because unless the most important person in their life is their spouse, and those children see a bond and understand relationships and understand they build off of that and they grow on that, that's a failed marriage and there's a failed kids as far as I'm concerned, because they didn't learn what they should have learned from their parents, and their parents didn't do a good job. So every time I hear a man or a woman say that, and I'm like, well, there's another loser, you know? And I mean, that's just my opinion, but that's what I think, because I've just seen it over and over again, that just happens to be the fact.
And I think, you know, especially when we're talking about our marriages, Tim, you and I talked about it, like working all the overtime. How many times, like, I know I'm guilty of it. I'm pretty sure I'll ask this question that every one of us as a husband has heard this. How many times has your wife told you, I feel like I'm raising these kids alone?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you heard the last podcast about that, how I could write a book about being a good husband.
Well, we all learned things.
You work
from
all the overtime.
In ways,
if you work all the overtime, you can't be at home being a bag, you know.
In ways, I think that's true, but in ways, you also have to be there to be the other half.
Yeah. No, I get that.
There's going to be resentment at some point.
Like I said, you got to find the balance, you know, because
because you could be like, I'm home all the time now. What do you mean? I quit my job.
Yeah, exactly. Then you'd be a shitbag, you know, and there's definitely those people out there.
Right. Yeah.
Just twitching on their streams and stuff and thinking they're going to make it big. All right.
So Jerrod, something you said earlier really made me think about something, and totally off topic, but you probably do a whole nother podcast if you want to do something that's controversial.
Write this down.
You said that we've been talking about people having children later in life and how they feel responsible and how they're more self-centered is how I took it younger in life.
Yeah.
To characterize what you say. But then if you look at it culturally and all the things that people protest about and things that we argue against. Okay. So in my generation, right? When I was 18 years old, I had to be responsible. I had to be prepared to be on my own and to feed myself, right? Take care of myself. And when I got married at 21, I had to be prepared to take care of an entire family. Now, people aren't like that today. So that begs the question in my mind, is 21 still the legal limit? Right? So, I mean, if you say, now, I'm selfish, I'm not responsible, I'm going to act as a child, does that legal limit move to 30? right? Have we moved in a culture in such a direction?
What do you mean by legal limit?
I can't drink till I'm 30.
Okay.
I can't own a gun till I'm 30. I can't vote till I'm 30. I can't get married till I'm 30. What does that move? What does that shift happen in culture? I just throw that out there. I know you'll edit this out.
Well, I think
I feel like that could be a real good one.
I think as a moral question, when you see people develop, like they say the front of your brain's not fully developed till you're 25. I really think things like voting shouldn't be until you're 25. But then there's the, freedom question. If you're going to do all these other things, if you can be conscripted for war, then you should be able to do all these things.
Right.
But until any of that moves,
right.
Because there's nothing in the Constitution about a voting age, because it used to be 21, right? Before it was 18. And before that, it was, all the other bad stuff that were.
Yeah, you had to be a dude.
You had to be a dude that owned land. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know, but back to the generation thing. It's like people are 25 years old putting on Facebook, I'm adulting today. Well, grow up, Peter Pan. You're 25 years old. Right. You know what I mean? Like, you should be happy to be an adult.
What does that mean?
Adulting?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like, what were you yesterday?
Peter Pan.
Interesting.
Like, do you want to be the coolest guy? Do you want to be the coolest guy at the frat party?
Then again, I just don't get
or the oldest guy at the frat party, I should say.
I don't get people nowadays. What about your kids? If you're growing up and then you have to call your dad your mom because that's cool now.
Yeah, that's a whole nother.
I mean, kids are so impressionable these days.
Too hot for TV.
I know. It's just. I don't get it.
Well, I think that's where the parenting part now for guys in our stage of life where we're raising our kids opposed to, Mike, yours are grown and you're helping, influence grandchildren. And my mom and I had this conversation the other day when I called her and she said, I cannot imagine raising teenagers right now.
Mm.
Or kids in general. I hear that a lot.
Just kids, period. Yeah, you're right. Because we have a different set of challenges as parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the vulnerability part comes in, is you have to be able to sit down and have that conversation based on what you believe and how you live your life and put your own values into your kids.
And the problem is, it's not just what you say is all they're going to hear. You tell them one thing, and then they hear 100 different things and they're like, well, my dad's a liar, or, something like that. Right. So I think there's a lot of conversations going on nowadays and I'm really not prepared for it. And I want to be that in our time going through school, that we didn't come home and ask these kind of questions.
No,
and that's just a whole challenge in itself.
Back when I was growing up, I remember in the 60s and 70s, culturally things were different. And in a community, people had values. They had similar values, right? And I can remember in a neighborhood. Now, what do I define a neighborhood? Well, it's about 40 houses on a street. And my boundary was about 4 streets in total, 4 or 5 streets. That was kind of the neighborhood, right? And you knew the kids in that neighborhood, and you knew the parents, and they watched out for you. But it wasn't like it is today. So if someone wasn't culturally normal, right? The parents knew that, and all the parents would tell you they're bad. Yeah. They're bad. Right. Don't do what they do. Don't go near them. Don't go in their house. Don't talk to them. They're bad.
Right.
Because they were different. Now, today, we'd all be cast out as whatever word you want to label us.
Bigots.
Because we didn't accept them. Well, back then, the community didn't accept them.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they didn't want to interact with them, but because they were afraid of the safety of their children.
Sure.
Right. And so they didn't want them to go around them. Right. If a man was single at 45 and never been married, they didn't want you talking to him.
Because he drove a van with no windows.
Right. So, hey, customized van came in the 70s and 80s. But but they didn't like that, right?
It's weird how that system worked.
It did. Or you had two women that weren't family that lived together that were 50 years old. That was a problem, right? And they spoke out about that. Or they realized that someone had been in trouble with the law and had something to do with children. They were chastised, right? That just didn't happen because the people wanted a community where you could put your children out in the morning. They could go play all day in the summer. Streetlights came on and they came home.
Yeah.
Right. That was the expected norm. Right.
Well, even I did that. I remember growing up in the trailer hood.
Yeah.
Shout out to Madison City.
Yeah.
Hell, I was 6, 7 riding my bike around.
Yeah.
The whole freaking trailer park.
Yep.
You know, I wouldn't let my kids do that now.
No.
Well, just growing up in Lucas, if you were doing something bad, somebody called your parents.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, we went to a school where our parents, everybody knew each other's parents.
Everybody knows everybody.
Yes.
And that's, sorry to cut you off, but that's one thing I wanted to ask. Do you feel like you're not a part of a community until you have kids? I mean, if you were to move into a community, are you really like meshed in that community until you have kids that are going to school or you're going to the church?
I think so.
You think?
And you could call it a community, you could call it your circle or your the people you associate with. But I think that definitely changes, you know?
Yeah.
So what kids did for me in Lucas was I had to meet other people that I would have never met.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So I had to meet your parents, right? And I had to meet other parents. And you know, I got to know them, right? Because you saw them at ball games, you saw them at school functions, you saw them at the grocery store, and you were able to talk to them, even though not long conversations, but at least you were a friendly hello to somebody and how are you doing and how are your kids kind of thing. And, you know, that builds rapport with people, I think.
Yeah,
sure. Get you the votes.
Yeah.
And I think kind of what you're getting to is you see changes in your circle, like you say, depending on what your kids are doing too. Your community becomes the people that you are doing that specific phase of life with.
You can't go out drinking if you got volleyball the next day, you know?
Well, with some people that doesn't stop them, but
that's true.
But I mean,
Mike raises his hand.
Put your hand down. You've never played volleyball in your life.
No, he was raising his hand with the drinking part.
Because you know,
my friends went to the bow.
It's you get to know other people based on what your kids are involved with.
Right.
And those become the people that you have shared experiences with. You start to look out for their kids when, you know, and I think that's one of the things that as a parent, as a dad, you need. You grow, it's not 100% comfort, but you gain comfort knowing that, you know, there's more than one dad. Like if I'm looking away for a minute, there's another dad who's looking. There's another dad who's watching.
Right.
Especially, and you'll find this out when your girls get a little bit older, dude. But having a teenage girl, that's a scary, scary moment in life.
Dad's crying over there.
Yeah, it's so we got to the boyfriend stage now.
Oh,
yeah. So my daughter's 27. When does that teenage period end? If you define that.
I looked it up. It's 2000 never.
Now you always worry about your daughter.
Yeah. Finding good people that you share values with, you kind of, you know, raise your kids the same way. Those are the people that you grow closer with just because, you know, hey, I can look out for their kids. They can look out for mine.
I'm sure outside of sporting events, I'm sure church helps a lot.
It does. The church is a huge help in that aspect.
Yeah.
There's some of the parents, like I'll go up and talk to them and be like, listen, we need to have a talk about your kids. And they're just like, oh, what did they do now? But then in the end, they're like, well, I'm glad you told me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be a much better place than like a Facebook group where you just start rumors like, and that's the other thing about not wanting to say anything to somebody else's kids about like, hey, don't wear that or, you know, whatever. You're just afraid of the repercussions of being called a bigot and being ostracized, and
Right.
the state police are coming. You know,
I think that's half the problem is people are afraid anymore now because everybody gets butthurt over everything.
yeah.
You know, people are scared to say
So it's
stuff
easier
anymore.
just to stick to yourself half the time.
Half the time, I think so. You know, I mean, I think being a good dad, and I know Jason talked about it a little bit, but watching out for each other's kids. But I think you should watch out for all kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, just because they're not yours doesn't mean that you know, shouldn't have their best interests.
Right.
You know, you can't be like, oh, that's not my problem. Screw it. You know, not that you need to make everything your problem, but you don't need to be the hero, but you need to be, you know.
And I think that's where the mentor thing comes in. Once you become a dad and you gain that level of caring about somebody else that's not yourself, you don't want people to go through painful experiences or mistakes that you've made in your life.
Right.
And I think that's like we said, you can apply that to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, sure. Maybe that kid's not going to listen to you, but if you're like, look, man,
I've been there.
I see that decision that you're about to make, and I made that decision, and this is what it cost me. Sometimes they're not going to listen, but sometimes they're like, oh, well,
I've taken 16 concrete bunnies when I was a teenager.
Interesting.
Yes, it's good.
Well, if you didn't really have a mentor growing up, who was in your ear making you know
that's a good question.
Well, let's go back and get a little bit of history on this. So your parents were together your entire life.
They were.
But
you weren't incarcerated.
You weren't incarcerated.
No.
But you didn't live at home for a lot of your
Right.
You know,
I moved out basically when I was 14.
when you were 14 and you went to
Seminary, private school.
a private school and you were, how long were you there? Like, did you come home on the weekends or?
No. I would come home every few months for a couple days.
Okay.
Now, did you feel like a stranger when you came home?
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, you could make a good joke about it. The first time I left, very first time, when I finally got to come home again, my parents had moved.
Did they tell you?
Yeah, they actually told me. And the priest at the school said, now, things are going to look a little different to you because you don't live in the same town anymore. And I'm like, oh, and we did. They moved and I went to this new place and I'm like, oh, and my dad said, yeah, this is going to be your house. I'm like, okay. So, yeah, so it was kind of different. So when I really left, my childhood was gone.
Right.
You know, my friends were gone. My neighborhood was gone. My life was gone. I had no one to go back to. It was just gone. It was all new.
And how did you handle that though?
It was tough. It was tough. I would sit outside. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know where to go. I mean, I had a lot of family in that town, but I didn't know them that well. So people were friendly to me, but I really didn't know what else to do. I mean, I was completely bored. I had no friends to go do anything with. So it was just fun to go back to school because I had friends there, and that's where I stayed for 4 years.
So with that being said, I would say that those were very impressionable years for you.
Sure.
What things did you learn or take back from your dad? Or, I mean, we talked about good and bad, doing things that they did and didn't do.
Right.
You know, like what kind of impact did he have when you were at that time?
So my dad's goal was to teach me to be honest, be polite, take ownership of what I did and didn't do. And quite frankly, I mean, I grew up and I was completely petrified of life. I was petrified of other kids. I was petrified of adults. And you wouldn't know that now. I mean,
Right.
because I can go up and talk to anybody and I don't care.
Sure.
But back then, I really was afraid. And I was afraid every day of my life. And it's not just saying I was afraid. No, I was freaking scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until I got out into high school around other boys and senior classmen, right? So when I was a freshman, I learned more off the seniors on how to interact with things and how to do things
Sure.
than really I did at home. And that's sad to say, but my parents were good to me. I never really wanted for anything, but it just wasn't that interaction until I became 14 and people's like, this kid's lost. Right.
Wow.
And somebody actually helped me. And it turns out it was a guy from the hometown I grew up in. I knew his family. His little brother and I were friends. And he knew me. So he took care of me a lot. And then they passed me down to the next group and the next group and the next group, you know. I mean, it was that's how I grew up.
You know, you mentioned that. And I think that's an interesting part. I think it's important for anybody that listens to this to say that if you're a new dad and maybe your dad's not in your life, I personally think it's very important to find a mentor that is a dad and to have like a series of mentors that are maybe like the next phase ahead of you. So you've got somebody to bounce some stuff off of. Let's be honest.
Right.
When we had our first kids, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to keep them alive.
Right.
You know? And one of the biggest things I think that my dad told me, and I really felt like I could accept it at that point in time, was you're going to get angry. It's okay to walk away. You don't have to just like hold them and go through it. Like, it's okay to set them down in a safe place and walk away.
Talking about your kids?
Talking about your kids.
Oh, yeah. I found that out when they're screaming and crying.
Yeah.
Walk away.
But I mean, you need somebody. Like even now, so my dad's gone, so I can't ask him these questions. So I found somebody else who I've grown close to that has his kids are all out of the house now. But I've texted him and called him and said, hey, look, my teenager's doing this, and I don't. How did you handle this? You know, because I want to ask these questions, and you want to ask somebody who's been there, and you feel like they've lived their life the right way, and you want to ask somebody for good influence, and he'll be like, oh, it's the worst thing that you're going to deal with, but this is just how I did it.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that his kids are probably doing pretty well.
Yeah. I mean,
otherwise he'd be like, I'm not going to ask you.
His kids are pretty successable. I mean, one of them went back to, you know, get a PhD. You know, not that I'm saying I expect my kids to get PhDs.
But that's a good person to ask them.
Let me tell you, Whiskey Mike has told us plenty of stories about people that have PhDs that are not the greatest people in life.
No.
But I feel like you have to have somebody who's at that next step that you can bounce stuff off of.
Right.
And that's where, again, that close relationship with your spouse that is more important. Just having that person that you can outlet, and that's the biggest thing, I think, for when you're struggling through moments.
Well, I always thought with my kids, I mean, I come from a vantage point. I have seen successful people. I have felt real loneliness in my life. And I always believed that finding love and creating that environment is more important than money. Now, people would look at me, and I've been very fortunate, and I've made a lot of money, but it was at a really high price.
Right.
I had to pay to make that. And I believe that, you know, college is great, and a lot of people can gain things from higher education, but I honestly believe that having a career, you know, having a trade, being able to be there, be present with your kids, have a family, I think that makes a person more successful than making $5 million a year. I really do.
Not to cut you off, but my dad actually told me something about that, because I noticed that, in my opinion, as a teenager, my dad wasn't like a lot of other dads. A lot of other dads, of course, you know, when I was in high school, you know, then late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the guys' dads, they'd been at the same company for 20, 25 years, you know, and my dad had done different things like you. He had a ton of different jobs, ton of different realms, but he looked at me and he said, it's never a bad thing to start something new as long as you are bettering yourself or your family.
Right. That's exactly right.
And I think that to your point, that's exactly what it is he was always, every time he started something new, it was with the intention of I can provide better and I can be there more.
Right. That's the goal.
Old Whiskey Mike changes jobs like every 3 years.
Yeah.
He's had this one for a while.
I'm going on 5.
Congratulations.
I'm not saying anything, but I like a party, he says.
So the longest I've ever had a job is 8 years at the same place.
8.
EMS.
Yeah.
Earn money sleeping.
Yep.
That's what it's about.
Well, we just talked last night how they didn't want to pay him while he was sleeping for a while.
Yeah. So
which is absurd.
When EMS first started,
There's still places around like that.
they put us
Well,
not
fire.
under strict. They didn't put us under EMS guidelines. They put us under trucking guidelines
Oh, for your
for ODOT. So
Yeah.
they wouldn't pay us 8 hours out of 24 because we were supposed to be sleeping.
that was your rest time.
Yeah. But then when we actually proved to the state back in the 90s that we actually took calls, they were astounded. So they had to go back and pay people.
Ooh,
Back
They had
pay.
to back pay.
love that back pay.
The funny thing is we didn't make a lot of money. So even though we worked 96 hours a week and got paid for 64, 2 or 3 years of back pay, whatever it was, came out to about $2,000.
Oh,
So you have to imagine
Yeah, but
when I
Things were
started.
still on the dollar menu back then.
oh
Yeah.
they
So-
had a dollar menu back then.
We had dollar menu, but
That's sweet.
the thing
You get 2,000 double cheeseburgers for that.
I was talking to Jerrod last night. So you go to Shelby Fire and you're all excited. You're a firefighter, paramedic, your first day, and you're like, how much do I make an hour? $3.25. And you'd be like, what? Do I get any extra pay for having hazmat? No. $3.25 an hour. And that's what people
But
were
how much
making.
was a gallon of gas? Like a nickel?
No, a gallon of gas was probably 70 cents, 60, 70 cents.
Dude. I mean,
See? I mean,
It was a totally different time.
It's all about perspective. Okay, I have a question. What are some traits that you that you think that you got from your dad, or like characteristics that, like, if you do something or whatever, like it makes you think of your dad, like, you know?
So my dad worked, most of my life, he worked with his hands. It was like a tradesman type. And it's at the end of his life, he was a service technician. And I was like, man, I could just never see myself going on the road, going to do these jobs and stuff like that. And now I'm a service technician, a field service technician. So I get in these experiences where you go to these customers and you get out there and you're like, man, he was great. He was a huge improviser. Like he could find a way to make something work when you're like, I don't know what we're going to do with this, you know? And I think I fall back on that sometimes. Just, I actually was lucky, and you guys will be able to relate to this. I was lucky enough that I actually worked with my dad in the same job, same type of role, actually on the same truck for over 2 years, every day.
that's cool.
And it was, that was one of those things where I said, well, we were like best friends. We just became super close. And sometimes he was in dad mode. Sometimes he was in coworker mode, you know? I was in my early 20s, living that crazy early 20s life at that point in time. So he would, pick me up in the morning and I'd be like,
Yeah, one too many
yeah,
Diet Cokes.
one too many Diet Cokes. And he'll just shake his head and laugh. And he was like, well, guess what? We're still going to work today. We're doing this. And that was another thing that he never shied away from the work. It was, I think it was more than just providing. Like, I think he was raised that hard work was something to be proud of.
Sure.
And nobody's going to do it for you. You need to do it yourself. And that was one thing that, I hear myself telling that to my son. And I'm like, well, nobody's going to do this for you. You got to do it yourself. And I'm like, man, or having conversations with my kid about grades. And I'm like, yeah, I've been here before. I've been on the other side of this conversation. But I think just when I do things, when I'm working sometimes with my hands, I'll be in a situation. I'm just like, man, my dad would probably think this is pretty cool. Like he would like what I do for a living because he liked what he did for a living. So many things. One thing is neat when your kids grow up is, so my son actually looks, it's uncanny. As a teenager, he resembles my dad. And my kids will make the faces that my dad would make, like when he grinned or when he was like, if he dug a little joke in there, like they'll make the same faces. And these things just come out and it just reminds me of them. Shooting is a big thing that reminds me of my dad. Yeah. I learned to shoot. He taught me to shoot probably really early. I'm going to guess about 8. Bought me my first gun that was mine when I was 10 for Christmas. It was a big thing, you know?
Yeah.
So, and of course we were raised in a different time where I lived on a small, like family farm kind of thing. Firearms were just part of life. It's just, you know, I still remember my dad having a gun rack in the back of the truck. It was just a regular thing to see everybody had a gun. Everybody, you know,
that's the way it should be.
That's America.
That's America. Yeah. So shooting reminds me of him. Sometimes when I volunteer work, it just getting out and helping other people that you don't really know. And there's nothing really in it for you. You just want to do something to make somebody else's life better. Reminds me of him a lot. Just because he was that guy that would pull over on the side of the road because he saw somebody broke down on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And you don't see that anymore.
Right.
And that's, you know, those are the things that kind of remind me of him. And I enjoy that sometimes when those moments come up.
Well, it sounds like, as far as I can tell, that's really the best thing you can do. Being a father is passing these skills on. So when you're gone, inevitably, you know, your kid's going to be okay. This is overused, but you can be a dad and not be a father.
Oh yeah. You know? 100%.
Like I would rather leave my kids with the knowledge of being a good human being and not just a bunch of money. Here you go.
Right.
Figure it out. You know,
and I don't know that. So your kids are a little younger.
Yeah, they're still
that thought.
They still cuss like sailors though.
Yes, they do.
Well, there's still time. No.
Yeah.
And I think it was just because I lost my dad unexpectedly, but I've had that thought where I was like, man, I've got so much stuff I got to teach these guys before I'm gone.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later you have to do it without me.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that becomes the scary part of it. As a dad, when they're growing up, you're like, when you realize that you have to teach them to do it for themselves, and sooner or later you're not going to be there to do it for them.
Right.
That's the scary part. And I think that's the other side of having kids younger is it's an added bonus because, you know, you take care of yourself, you know, Lord willing, you're around to be that safety net.
Right.
I don't know how many times like epically failed in life. And my dad was there as that safety net. That's great. You know, you want to be that for your kids. And I think that's where those statistics come in.
Right.
You know, kids screws up.
That has to be where it comes in. And it's not saying anything bad about, you know, moms, because these dads aren't that great if they're gone. I mean, that's where it comes from. It's not saying that you like just a dad's going to fix all your problems. Preferably it's both.
Right.
You know, and kids aren't necessarily damned just because they live with their mom. I mean, a lot of these moms figure it out, you know.
I've seen a lot of these moms be more of a dad than some other dads I know.
Yeah.
Right.
They still don't get Father's Day though.
No,
I'm not giving them that.
No.
You know, so I know a single mom. I'm trying to remember how old her son is, but they had a thing where it was a son and dad bonding thing where they had like a Nerf war or something.
Yeah.
And she said that he looked right at her and goes, well, what do I do? Like, how do I be involved? I don't have, like, where's dad kind of thing. And she's like, well, you can still go. Like, I mean, and even like, she was like, I'll go with you, or, you know, we can find another one of the guys to go with you. And so they know, like, that's the other side of this. Those kids know that they don't have a dad.
Right.
And I think that's where, when they get to be teenagers, that's where like the acting out, the seeking the attention. And that's the other side of the coin is somebody's going to give them that attention. And it's probably not the right kind of attention that you want them to have.
Right.
But even in our own family, we've seen, I mean, my side of the family and your mom's side of the family, we've seen divorced people. But the interesting thing is we've also seen what if a man really wants to be involved in the kid's life, the kids turn out okay. It's when no one gets involved, right, in the kid's life that they don't, that they struggle, and it's very important that they have, in my opinion, both a male and a female construct in their life to show them that this is both sides of the coin. This goes past what people want to think. It really comes down to biology. It comes down to your human being. You have male things, you have female things, and you have different points of view. And I think that's what a mother and a father bring, are different points of view.
Yeah, you need both sides of the equation.
You do. It's kind of tough.
But I kind of want to circle back, and Jason, you were talking about how scary it is about teaching kids, everything that you can teach them before you leave this earth. Right. And I don't know how other people think, but at least in my point of view is I agree with that, but it's more of teaching them how to be a good person and not necessarily life skills. And I don't know if that's what you were talking about. But it just made me not that I just realized, but like with Dad here, old Whiskey Mike.
Yeah.
He is probably one of the least mechanically inclined people I know when it comes to fixing stuff. So I found
that's true.
Well, no, it's it
is true.
It's true. Some things he's great at, but I like to know a little bit about everything, So I found myself teaching him, not necessarily life skills. I think he's given me a good foundation for the life skills.
Right.
And I don't think that he's done teaching me everything that he wants to teach me. But as far as, doing a brake job or
you're 100% right.
Or doing this or that. And I just wanted to throw my perspective on it and kind of build off that. But, and I think that he's done a good job of teaching me the, how to be a good person and how to do this. But when it comes down to, doing something for yourself, a lot of that.
Well, he taught you water shuttle before you were 12.
That's true. I can haul water with the best of them boys.
That was one criticism I always had of my own father was, he had a phrase that he told me a million times. And the phrase was, it only takes a little more to go first class. And what he meant by that is it doesn't matter what you're doing in life. And he used to tell me, he's like, son, if you're hired to dig a ditch, dig the best damn ditch they've ever seen. Because it only takes a little more to go first class. But the problem I had with my dad was he never taught me how to dig the ditch. Right. And he didn't show me certain things that I thought I should have known. Right. But philosophically, he told me to basically embrace it and do the best that anyone's ever done with it.
Right.
And that's tough when you don't have the skills to go out and do that.
And I remember you saying that to us.
Yeah.
20 some years ago. I remember you saying, well, if you guys are going to do it, just do it, but do it the best you can do it.
Right.
And Tim, you're 100% right. It's sure not everybody's going to go out and be like, well, this is how you frame a house. This is how you change your brakes. This is how you change your oil. Now, for people that have those skills, I think those skills can be the bonding moments that we've discussed. That can be the big points, Teaching skills can make major bonding moments. But I think one thing that we've focused on and we're trying to get through right now that I know that we are missing in society today is, how do you have a conversation with somebody that doesn't see eye to eye with you?
You mean as far as your kids?
Yeah. Like teaching our kids, like, look, just because somebody doesn't think the same thing you do, you're still going to have to interact with that person.
Right.
Like it's a major life skill. Like you're going to go to work someday and there's going to be people that view life in a totally different way than you do. And you still have to figure out how to communicate,
right?
How to be effective.
Yeah. You can't just block them.
Well, and I think that all boils down to, you have to have those conversations and they might not get it.
Right.
Just like we didn't get some of those things before we became a dad. When you become a dad, those things make sense.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That light bulb pops off and you go, oh, that's what that dude was talking about. You know?
Right.
I have those moments all the time, you know? So I think you still need to try to be a good mentor and have those conversations, even if they're like, they just don't freaking understand, right. You know?
But that kind of lends to the fact that, and maybe you haven't realized this, maybe you have, your children are different people. Even though they grow up in the same house, they have the same parents, they do all the same things, they're different people. And what I had to learn, and I remember, and I've said this to my own children many times, they're like, you know, the middle one would say to me, you would say to me, you don't love me like the other kids. Yes, I do. I just don't like you today as much as the other child. And the reason is because they're different people and they interact with you differently. And when you talk about mentoring, it becomes very difficult. In certain tasks, I know between Tim and Jerrod that if I want to convey a message, I can't use the same words and I can't use the same style. Right. Tim would rather figure it out on his own. Right. So I can explain it to Tim and say, I don't know. You need to go look it up, because that's how he learns. Jerrod, if I honestly want to teach him something, I've had to explain it and show him, because that's the kind of person he is. Right.
It's a really good point.
They're different people and they will interact with you different. They will treat you different. And you have to be able to interact with them on their level, because that's how they learn. Right. And that's how they understand. And it's not good or bad. It's just everybody's different. So.
Good point.
And I do want to add, if you can do a brake job and like change out a water heater and stuff, that doesn't make you a good dad.
No,
like that's not the only thing. Just so everybody's clear.
I know a lot of douchebags
you could change brakes and be a terrible dad.
Yeah, but basic oil changes are required.
I would say you are correct.
And there's nothing wrong with, you can't just sit there and be like, well, I would help, but my dad never taught me how to do it. Maybe you should like figure it out eventually.
Yeah, guess what, nerd? We got Google now.
Yeah, there's no excuse
and
anymore.
YouTube.
Yeah.
But to touch on what you were saying, it's 100% true. So our oldest, she is the one where I have to approach anything that I want to talk to her about. Like if I don't agree with something she's doing, I have to be very cautious about that. And it's a difference between boys and girls. It's a difference just in each individual kid. There was a point in time in her life where if I looked at her funny, she'd start crying. You know, like if she thought I was about to say a discouraging word, like she's already in tears before I even start to talk. And then there's the one that's like, she's the one that I'm pretty sure, like I'm almost willing to bet when the officer calls at 2:00 in the morning, I know which kid it's going to be, you know?
Yeah.
But you have to, talking to them different. They are different people. You're going to raise them different because different approaches aren't going to work. But then again, you have to realize, and this is a coworker of mine taught me this. He said, I started very young, but then I had a second marriage and she had young kids. And my kids were already like older teenagers. And you have to realize that they're not only changing, but you're changing.
Mm-hmm.
Like your environment is changing. You're getting older the way you're.
Yeah. You're not the same person you were.
No. So,
and that's like what he was saying about being a grandfather. Your perspective has changed.
Right. I told you it's all about perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you went to that class.
Thanks, Chief Paskew.
Sound like a good, decent man.
He was a good man.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we haven't discussed yet is don't discount the little moments in life, because the biggest memories that you're going to recall or your kids are going to recall are just the stupid little moments. Do you remember the school bus call?
Yes.
2 Road.
Yep, I do.
Do you remember the look on, like you made this eye contact with me and you noticed it in my face. So, for everybody who wasn't there, that was the first time that we lost somebody on my call. And I remember it was the small department we were on. That was the first time that we had lost somebody as a department. There was a bunch of new personnel and they were really worried about us. And they called in like a
critical stress debriefing team.
Yep. And we're all sitting in this cafeteria and this guy asks, well, is there anybody that anybody's especially worried about? And the entire room just looks and locks eyes on me.
Way to single you out.
Yeah. It was.
You got mascara running down your face. Like,
But then again, in retrospect, these guys were my age. And to this day, I can remember everything about that call. But I remember being told by my dad, and then I know that you said something along the lines of this. It is the lessons you learn from the ones you lose make you better at this job.
Right.
That was deep.
Yeah. And so it's just the little moments. Yeah. It was like a tragedy moment in my life, but it was a little moment later on. And they just allowing kids to process things. So when I'm saying this, I was a 17, 18-year-old kid at the time as an explorer and processing it. But then you guys as father figures realized, okay, this kid's going through something and I got to let him process it, but I also need to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one too. Just recognizing when your kids, and it goes back to being present, because you'll see the difference in them when they're processing something.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great program. I wish more kids could go through a program like that. That was all the kids on that department saw something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of it was traumatic, fatal. But of all the kids that saw the fatal things and the traumatic things,
We're taking medicine now.
yeah.
Some of it's
sponsored by Lexapro.
But I remember people and other adults, my own wife, question doing that, letting you see those things. But to me, a guy who left home when he was 14,
right,
I understood that life wasn't fair, but it was life. And in order to really experience life and understand it, you had to see it, and I think more kids should be exposed to something like that under a mentorship or someone that can explain it to them, because when it happens to them, and it will, bad things happen, they can deal with it.
right.
Mm-hmm. It's all about the experiences and the exposure.
Yeah.
Living under a rock, you got to let your kids be kids.
Yeah.
You can, just to protect them from everything. They are not going to be worth a crap in life when it becomes real situations.
And I think that's the kind of the edge we had, now that I think about it, because he wasn't teaching us how to change brakes, but we would see stuff.
Definitely.
And he'd be like, it's okay.
Right.
But there's other people, I guess I haven't really thought about it. They start doing that career or any other career that involves, I don't call it trauma, I call it spicy memories.
Yeah.
And they go to call their dad, be like, hey, I saw something up. And they're like, sorry.
But then again,
just with no context, you know what I mean?
It's
Right.
different. It was different for us because our dads were there.
That's what I mean.
They walked that walk,
Right. Me and Tim had talked, whatever podcast we did, about growing a culture in that kind of field. And that's where it comes from. People's dads and grandparents were firemen and they're like, yeah, it's okay.
Yep. Well, you don't know how many times I've been on call. I don't want to say, well, of course I went to medic school and I learned how to be a medic in medic school, but I barely cracked a book. If I didn't understand something, I went to this old guy right here and says, hey, explain this to me. But even beyond that, working on my own as a lead medic or a senior medic or whatever, you'd get on a totally up scene, you know, and, you know, a lot of people would freeze or freak out. And then I just think to myself, well, my dad's probably been here and he got through it. So you just fucking jump down in the shit and you get stuff done, you know.
Guess I'm stopping by the liquor store on the way home.
but no, seriously. I mean, both of you have been inspirations to me in my job. You know, you get in a shit situation, you know, whether it's you, Dad, or Jerrod when you were deployed. I'm like, well, Jared's over there fucking risking his life. I might as well jump in and do that. You know, I'm just doing this. This is nothing compared to what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's always been, you know, pretty inspiring to me. It's the go juice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, Mike. You know, you like the program, but on the other side of the coin, it had to be different for you because as a dad, you watched the three of us enter into that kind of a lifestyle with a different concern because you were personally invested.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, it came down, it really, there were two calls that really hit me personally with kids on that department. One was a wreck where a girl was near death, one of Tim's classmates. And another young boy from the community was there on the department. And we didn't have enough hands. So two senior people were there and we were running the call. And when we got her extricated out, I made them help me carry her to the truck and then go with us. And part of that was a split decision that I had to either be a fire and EMS officer and I had to be a dad at the same time. And that was a scary thing to make that decision. But I'm glad I did because it taught those boys, this is what you don't do, right? This is what you don't do when you're behind the wheel of a car.
Right.
There was another call clear out on 39 near Perrysville where we thought that whole gas plant was going to blow up, right? And so I had to take a team of firefighters in and we had to be ready to help shut things down. And I remember looking at my oldest son at that point, just before I went, and tell him, you know, goodbye, right? And that was hard, you know, because I didn't know if we were coming out of there.
Right.
Because I knew if that went, we were all gone, right? And there was no saving us. So, I mean, that was difficult. But those were moments that built something for him. And they built something for me, but that's a big risk to take. I mean, most people will never find themselves in that situation their entire life. I've been in a lot of bad situations, and it wasn't about me. I wasn't afraid for me. I was always afraid for who I brought in with me or who I let in. Because when you're an officer, that's your call, right? You have to be responsible, and that was a scary moment.
I was just getting emotional listening.
Now, so I have a question for you guys. Do you feel like, so I know at different points in my life, I felt like there was a bar, like a bar that I needed to measure up to because my dad was that good dude. Like, do you feel at different points in time, like you're like, I know my dad would perform to this level at this situation and I feel like I need to.
Yep. And like I talked about, you know, being a paramedic, I take my job seriously. I know that my dad is a very respected person amongst the fire and EMS community. So by having his last name, I think that's the bar.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I have to take my job seriously. I have to try to be the best provider, paramedic, whatever that I can be. And I think that I do that. I think that other people look up to me I'm not going to say I'm the best paramedic out there, but I think I'm pretty damn good without tooting my horn.
Well, I mean, I hear blowback from the community on the other way. And I honestly think, yeah, I did a lot of work in the community, but I think you guys are there, and I think you guys have surpassed me. I really do. And I'm proud of that.
I haven't had nearly enough coffee to surpass you yet. Give me another 20 years.
Yeah, you'll never drink the coffee he's thrown away.
Do you raise your daughters to be more boyish, or do you teach them like what men should be, like what a good dad should be, or is there a both? Do you try not to take it in one direction where you're like, okay, I don't actually want you to be a dude, but you like, you know what I'm trying to say?
I think you do. From one perspective, you want your daughter to be able to make it on her own if she has to.
Mm-hmm.
You want her to have those life skills.
Yeah.
But also it's very important to me to teach her. And this is where I think the example of being a good spouse comes in. And definitely being a good father is teaching your daughter what to look for in a good dude.
Right. Well, they always say, you marry your father, right?
Right.
That's the old adage, right?
But
That's what they say.
you really, I think we're in the teenage years, we've got the boyfriend thing going on. It's very important to us to teach her what to look for and how somebody treats her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you can teach her the life skills. Like you don't want to exclude her from guns and, from America things or experiences. If I had a daughter that said, you know what, I think riding a fire truck would be cool. Be like, get to it.
Yeah.
Find an explorer type program. It's a great experience. You're going to learn great things. There's great people in this industry.
So you're definitely not the that's for guys thing kind of dad.
Absolutely not. My youngest is probably the one who the most will come out and be like, oh, you're going to go do this on the car. Well, can I come help? She's the youngest girl. And I think you teach them everything. But then again, on the other side of the coin, when you're a boy dad, you also have to remember to teach how you treat a girl.
Mm-hmm.
That yes, girls are different. You treat them the same, but different.
Mm-hmm.
Very important.
So there's a different expectation.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's the same, but
Mike, would you agree with that? I mean,
I would. I failed when it came to a daughter. I mean, I honestly.
she might listen to this.
Yeah,
so
that's all right. That's all right.
You want to rephrase that?
No, I didn't. I personally failed because I struggled.
Just your brothers are both shaking their heads at that statement.
Yeah, no, I felt like I failed because I never felt like I reached her at her level. Right. So with the boys, it was easy, right? We could go hunting. We could go fishing. We were on the fire department. They did a lot of the things I did, and it was very easy to interact with them. But for her, it was harder for me, and it was always a struggle for me to try to reach her to where she was at. Right. And I really wanted my wife to do that because I felt more that she could connect with her. And it's just difficult. And I still struggle with that. I want to be in her life. I want to do things with her, but it's hard for me with all my past experiences and what I enjoy doing to try to connect with her at her level, what she enjoys so that we can build those moments. And that's what's difficult for me.
Yeah.
Building on that, I think it's important to say, meet your kids where they are. For my daughters, they both swim. Okay. I know absolutely nothing about competitive swimming.
Don't drown.
That's a big thing. That is a big thing. And just to shout out to kind of pick on my kid, my son, he's definitely not a swimmer. He's a sinker. So if there was a cannonball championship, he might win. But like you said, there's so many resources now. There's no reason not to be able to invest that time
right
in your kid to meet them where they are. for something that's important to them. So, just going to meets, listening to the coaches, just, try not to
showing some interest.
Absolutely. And
so have fun, go swim.
Yeah.
Be on my phone.
Pulling some stuff up on YouTube and be like, oh, well, these guys are doing this a little different than you are. Just showing that little bit of investment,
Right.
I think has made leaps and bounds in that relationship to where they're different, but you can still be a part of it. So I have a question for you guys. Mike, we'll start with this with you. If you could change one thing with an approach on raising your kids, what would that one thing be?
Well, I honestly have to say with my kids, I should have made more time for them. And I think that would be very important to do that.
Okay.
For me now, I was a couple weeks ago, I was doing the normal scrolling through Instagram Reels, just getting my dopamine hit like 4 seconds at a time. But somebody said something that somebody had told him. I don't remember the guy's name, but he said, when you get frustrated with your kids, just picture yourself at 80 years old and you could go back for one day in that moment in time when they're throwing their tantrum. How would you treat that? You're 80 years old, but you get to go back for one day when you're in your 30s. Would you scream at them or spank them? So me personally, I try to kind of think of that because we're in the tantrum phase, so I'm like,
that's tough.
So I'm just
that's
like,
a tough phase.
Do I really have to act out and like try to be over aggressive and you know what I mean? And discipline.
Right.
Or just kind of like we talked about earlier, just chill.
For me, honestly, I think I rely too much on electronics for babysitting or for them to like chill the out.
That's
guilty.
That's one that we face that, our parents didn't have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to do this. Well, why don't you go sit on your iPad for a while and, do something, instead of doing X, Y, or Z,
Yeah.
Right.
And we talked about, kind of when you want to have your relaxed time and you're kind of just passing off your kids to the electronics, whatever. I am guilty of that. And I need to change that,
I agree with that. I think it's
too easy.
It's way too easy.
And guess what? They're still impressionable and they're learning from that, good or bad.
Oh yeah. I agree. I think so. Mine right now is definitely the mixture of things that have been said. For sure. I regret the time that I've already missed because my wife actually looked at me 2 weeks ago and my oldest just finished up her freshman year. And she said, we've only got 3 years left with her.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, holy crap.
Reality check.
Yeah. And I'm like, boy, did I screw this up? So now I'm in this stage where I'm like, well, how do I cram 15 years of crap into 3 years?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I didn't do it.
Right.
So I regret the time and the chances I didn't take, but I also realize it and see it in myself. Like you said, my kid might be sitting 2 cushions away from me on the couch watching something, and I'm sitting here scrolling my phone.
Yep.
Where
we're all addicted to our phones.
And I can put the phone down and just have a conversation with my kid, or be like, "Hey, that's one thing." So my son, he's a big reader, so he's been reading series that have movies, and for 2 weeks, it took me 2 weeks to find the time. He read a book. Our deal is that if you read the book all the way first, I'll sit and watch the movie with you.
I like that. That's good.
And he's doing the Tolkien series right now. So,
Sweet.
I mean, it's a chat,
yeah,
it's a big book. So he's putting some time investment into this. But after I sat and watched the movie with him, I was like, man, why did it take me 2 weeks to find time to sit down and watch this movie with him?
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple hours.
Right.
But he's going to remember that when he was a teenager, I read these books and then Dad and I sat down and watched all the movies together. So I realized that in myself. And I think that's one of the bigger things. Even if your kids are adults, I'm going to put this out there for any listeners. Even if your kids are adults, it's not too late for you to make those changes.
Yeah, start now.
Like for real.
Right.
Just invest in them, whatever they're doing.
That's what I was going to tell you is, you were like, oh, shit, what am I going to do? I gotta have to make up all this time, but don't dwell on it. Like, start now and try to make change. It's amazing how much you can better your life or change things the way they are now just by, you said that was 2 hours, right?
It's 2 hours.
You could work out for 30 minutes or an hour, of a day.
I've lost 2 hours staring at my phone before.
Oh, definitely.
It's easy.
Absolutely.
It's easy.
Thanks, China.
Yeah.
But it's these addictions and habits that we have to break ourselves.
Right.
So.
And I think that becomes the challenge. My kids are older. So, of course, she's in the cell phone stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, my wife and I, we found ourselves like having a talk with her about, why are you on your phone so much?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I know we're going to wrap up here soon, but just curious. What are your guys' thoughts on when should kids have cell phones?
Oh, man, I feel like we should have definitely got to this one a little bit earlier. So we waited until our oldest was a freshman. The summer before she became a freshman in high school,
Okay.
we got her a phone. That phone is very restricted and controlled. But I think some parents are going to say there's a necessity for it to be different, depending on the lifestyle you lead.
Okay.
Like if that kid is ultra active, always on a sports bus, you don't know,
Right.
Where they're going to
If
be.
you are away from them.
Yeah, then
That seems
that is a
appropriate.
great tool that we have in our age of parenting to be
Sure.
like, I can contact my kid wherever they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, then again, you can also find your kid wherever they are.
Right.
Sure.
But there's also the other side of that where you have to put the investment and the time into making sure that your kid's safe on that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not just a one-way line.
Yeah. It's
That's the pitfall.
I see a lot of kids, and I don't know the situations, you talk about different situations, but I see some kids that are very young that have cell phones.
You see, and then there's the other side of that coin too, where you don't know if we were just talking about this in a small group setting at church the other day. We know parents that are separated.
Mm-hmm.
And when that kid's with dad, mom wants to be able to check on that kid,
Right.
wants to be able to know that kid's okay. They want to know that if there's something wrong, that kid can get a hold of them.
Mhm.
Right.
And I can see how that creates that extra need for an earlier set of a phone. But I think we need to remember, like you said, thanks a lot, China.
Right.
There's so many things on that phone
That are terrible.
terrible.
Mindset.
so many
The world
predators.
is evil. Okay.
Oh,
The world is just evil, and kids are going to experience evil, whether we like it or not.
right.
Like I said, you have to be that guiding path of that mentor of, this is good and this is bad. But yeah, I don't know. I think there are just kids out there that, again, are being parented by their electronics, and there you go.
I think the right answer is it depends.
I have to wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah,
there.
it depends on- it depends on your
it's a
situation.
situational thing.
I mean, 4-year-olds don't need cell phones if that's what you're asking.
No,
But anytime they're going to be moving, like leaving the house,
I mean, does a 10 or 11-year-old need a cell phone?
I think needs kind of a strong word. Like Jason said, there's phones that you can have where it just calls 3 numbers and you can text 3 people.
The other thing that we did is we call it a house cell phone. It's just a generic cheap cell phone.
Little cricket.
Not like that. But anyway,
Mobile, where you at?
but it's the house cell phone that the younger kids can use. They can give their friends that number so that they can communicate. But then again, and then like our son, like if he goes to grandma's house or something like that, and we need to like call him to say, hey, we're coming to get you or something like that, we'll send that with him. Or if he goes for an overnight or something like that. But it's not their device.
Yeah.
And we can also control everything that happens on that device.
That's a smart move right there.
Jerrod, get off the phone.
Yeah.
My turn.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. I think it's very situational.
Good.
That answer your question?
I think it does.
Cool.
I think it does.
Well, thanks for coming on. This has been a great combo.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody's input.
Yeah.
Well, I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
No
No
problem.
problem. Happy Memorial Day. Not happy, but
It's not happy.
It's not a day. It's not a happy day.
yeah. Thank you to all the service members who gave their life for us so we could sit outside and listen to chickens and talk about being a dad. So thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.
Later.